BunnyCast episode number 11 with myself, Homer, and other. Homer, anything to add? After the break, less of the show.
Sometimes the dreams come back and seem so real to me. The sky turns so cold and black. I'm scared of what I see, but I'm not afraid anymore. You vanquished my fears. You gave me the reason to laugh and stole all my
Okay, and welcome to another BunnyCast. The date today is January 15th.
No, it's not.
Oh, sorry. It's the 15th in the States, where it matters.
Actually, it's about to turn the 16th in about a minute here.
See? WS knows what I'm talking about.
Well, okay, I've got an hour
and
left.
there are our little guests.
It's as you can hear, we've got WMS.
Yo.
And we have been officially lapped by the Bungie podcast, so that's kind of what prompted me to say, okay, we've got to get the show back on the road. For those of you unfamiliar, the Bungie podcast is notorious for having huge gaps in between episodes. It was a surprise when they had 2 episodes in 1 month, to give you an idea. Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
For the record, I might make it clear that we are missing one person, that is Killerfish, and that's largely to do with the fact that no one has any idea what the hell is going on with him, or where he is.
Well, last I had heard, he was setting up to be a Bobby, a police officer. So that might have something to do with his absence.
And possibly him hitting the donut shops.
True.
And yes, that joke does hold true in Australia for those Americans that think it's only an American joke.
Yes, although in the UK it's probably more of a scones shop.
No, I think it's turned into donut shops over there. A joke. In fact, my brother, he went on holidays recently. A lot of his photos were of police-related paraphernalia because, well, he is a policeman, particularly cop shops. And one of his photos that he was most proud about was showing 2 police cars in front of a donut shop.
You can't top us from about, I'd say 8 to 10 years ago. We actually had a police helicopter land in a parking lot to get donuts.
Oh my goodness. I hadn't heard about that.
Well, that's one way to do takeaway.
Good old APD.
Okay.
When they're not beating up suspects, they're doing that.
Yes. Okay, and all right. So let's move on swiftly and with great haste, so as to keep this podcast as short as possible. Although, our track record with that. Let's talk about forum news. Squato, you're all over this one.
All on it like a rash. Yes, you don't want to know how I picked that little statement up from. Short version is, yes, there's actually a fairly large amount to update on that, partly because Killerfish and Homer really hadn't done too much on the forums, and also because I've not been around for a while. Short version is, yes, they're still around, and to some people that's surprising. There's new members on there, there's old members on there, that's all going on, but the big things are a couple of months back. Forgot his name. He came. One of the. I know him more from the Watchers anyway. He started this topic about how the forum itself has the code itself can allow people to put sub forums in different sections. For example, if there was Dan had wanted to have sub-forums for EGS, he could. Dan heard about this, investigated apparently a little bit, and then was interested enough in it, and then his idea was for the main forums was to actually have a few subsections. For example, one subsection for the main comics, one subsection for fillers, newspapers, whatever, one for fan works, and anything for general discussion, including things which he felt he would like people to discuss, but they don't feel like they should on there. For example, big movies that they would like to see, or games they like playing, for example. That went on there. Mayhem also, someone decided, well, if that's going to be the case, maybe we should bring in Mayhem. That kind of caused a little shitstorm going on that side of the fence, because there's some in Mayhem who apparently view Mayhem as being completely and utterly separate from EGS, and once they heard that apparently Dan was going to be coming in and breaking things up, they decided that this was time to lead the great Mayhem Revolution, or as they so called it, which basically was they split off.
Something like internet rage.
to which all the old-timers will probably say, bye-bye.
No, it was being led by a lot of the old-timers.
Really?
Yes. Particular noteworthy names would be AP and Mal. Two of the big names that were the ones arguing for a splitting of the forums. Particular point being is that Dan has nothing to do with Mayhem, so why should they care about listening to him when he doesn't care for them? Obviously, that was good because that shows how much they want to mend bridges in the first place.
Yes, quite.
Yes, why mend a burn? It's interesting. It's getting fun with AP at late with some of the forum issues, particularly Mayhem.
I'll leave the definition of fun up to the listener's imagination there.
My apprentice isn't involved in any of this, is he?
Your apprentice?
Who's your apprentice?
GA Jedi Knight, I believe.
Not quite, no.
Okay. Just curious. Curious how the old apprentice is doing.
Alive and well, possibly.
Possibly. I like that. Nice.
Yes. So that's the main forum news. The other big thing was that Dan had made the discussion of he was going to bring in new mods, which then got people going, I'm going to be a mod now, and leading a campaign for them to be voted the mods, before Dan decided how he was actually going to pick mods. And the intention for that, some people argued, was this is so Dan has an idea of who he should be picking.
Don't look at me. I was Uber back in the day, so that's my idea of a mod. You probably don't want them to follow my advice, though.
Yeah.
I put down my reasons why that's a bad decision to be trying to do that voting thread thing, particularly because it kind of makes it be forced into something which the forums may not want, and in the end people just went, screw it, we'll just have it for fun. Especially because since all this has happened, Dan's done, and I'm putting this the lightest way possible. Fuck all.
Nice.
And I say that because Dan said he's going to do the forums thing, nothing's happened. Dan's also said he's going to pick the new mods, nothing's happened. So me bringing this up is kind of me trying to push people to remind Dan to do this, if he is going to do it or not.
Right.
Particularly because he did his big little stink about it. And hey, any of the older members would really know how much Dan does that a lot, which is, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm all for it, and then nothing happens.
Okay.
Drama.
Yes. Okay. Comic news. Obviously, the comic is back up and running, and I'm pleased that the story comic is back in action. The news van in the story arc kind of surprises me. I was not expecting such.
Maybe it's going to be the character that gets that reporter that was Dan had drawn beforehand. That was kind of from the Mythos arc, who he did it as a little fan art to that character. I'm just thinking if they'll have someone similar looking to that woman pop up again. Without the cow horns.
Right. I'm kind of thinking that the mundane explanation for the news van is that they're covering the uniform thing, but I have a feeling that it's probably more for the odd disturbance involving the creature.
I think a statement was actually made about that in there in one of the previous comics, but don't quote me on that because I kind of haven't really had the chance to focus my mind on that too much. Other things going on in my life to distract me.
Right.
Although the big controversy we've sort of had with the comic is since I'd last been on, the comic went from black and white to colour, and now back to black and white, which is either controversial from those that liked it being a black and white comic, or those that feel it's only good when it's in colour.
As for me, all I really care about is that for Dan to figure out whatever the hell it is that makes him able, whatever works for him, that lets him keep churning it out, and to do it, because I know he's had issues with that over the years.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this in the past, but I really did appreciate in the earlier renditions of the comic when his art wasn't all that great, and there were some plot holes that would appear in the story, but he was updating very, very regularly, and
more than most, even today.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be he was just like an art powerhouse. He was just not only the story comic, but also what he later developed into NP and the sketch artwork and the one-offs. And I mean, he used to just throw stuff out like crazy, and now it's comparatively a slow trickle. Now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Then again, he is more focused than other things, like his uni work. Well, sorry, college. I've got to get it right for America.
Yes, the more webcomics than I can even begin to list.
Yes.
Is that, well, eventually the people have classes and sooner or later they gotta do it. Although to a certain extent, I think, from watching Dan's art design and the effort he puts into it, seems like the perfect is the enemy of the good in his case.
Yeah.
He's definitely improved the quality, but it does come at a cost and the frequency, so it's a trade-off.
True.
Of course, there is a big problem that people have is when he sometimes decides, I'm going to rechange what I've been working on with the story focus.
Well, he is
which pops up.
He's the creator. It's his baby. Which kind of.
Well, no, the old yes, the old terminology. Just trying to think of the name for it. Was the old title he had before was the retcon king.
Well, some of the fan reaction to Dan strikes me very similar to if you've read Something Positive lately, the fangirl story arc.
I know of the comic, but I haven't read it.
The fangirl story arc is it's kind of the artist really seriously poking fun at all the fanboys and fangirls that they decide that they are more important than the author or writer of whatever it is they're a fan of, and start making terrible, hideous demands of the artist or author or whatever, to the point where it becomes detrimental to the product itself.
Oh yeah, I remember that might have been something when RPG World went kablooey a couple of years ago. That might have been part of it. It was a little hard to say, though.
Right.
I think other
Actually,
reasons.
you just made your little but your little point you said there. It just made me remember there was a comic recently did that in which the artist just blew up at the fans, and his entire image was, well, his next update, the one where he told fans he'd had enough, was a drawing of him with a huge middle finger pointed at the fans, telling people to get fucked. Everyone to get fucked.
Yeah.
And that's paraphrasing the entire paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of him saying why he hated his fans for what they'd done to him.
Oh yeah, she always got the rabid nuts.
Okay.
Although, if you want another controversial look at the Watch with the latest story arc, that's got its own little controversy, just comic-wise. Particularly if who's meant to be on the if it's meant to be as Miranda West is an evil bitch, an evil witch.
Either way.
For what? Yeah, because of what she did, or is Ivan or whatever his name is now is an idiot for what he did, and there is no there's no point in the center between both idiots and they're both wrong. It's either one's wrong and one's right, or one's wrong and one's right.
Yeah. Usual fan community. Who's Squato? That's you. Stop it. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next segment. WMS. We know you. Well, I know you as this awesome guy who came in a couple years ago to be knighted at Comic-Con. And I think outside of that, not a whole lot of people know a whole lot about you or what you do or who you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Alrighty, a little bit. I work as a geographic information systems technician, which basically means I make maps and stuff that goes on them. That's pretty much the short of it. I told you, Squato, I didn't guarantee that what I said would be that much fun. So there.
No, it's map making is actually starting to become a really big deal, at least amongst the online geek community. I'm sure that you, WMS, obviously you know about Google Earth and what's going on with that.
And you've also got XYCD, where it's got the thing where they do with people go using the stock market and they'll find a location to visit.
It's fun. It's fun watching all the people playing around with it. Because it's like, I work with, most of the stuff I work with isn't accessible by the public, although some of it is. But there's like a fair amount of data which is just internal to the government entity for which I work. So there's a lot more out there than you think.
He knows if there's anything in that spot in Nevada which is not officially on the maps anywhere, but apparently is on Google Maps.
Yeah, the big white spot that doesn't exist. The white spot that if you were, look, it's right there, I can see it. You're not authorized to see that, son. Now back away from the white spot.
I think we're a little more relaxed. I mean, I remember seeing it on Google Earth. We even have, that's where all the nuclear warheads are stored into the mountains, southeast of Albuquerque a little bit, right over there.
Oh, and this is your entry code if you would like to go in there and borrow it if you would like for the weekend.
Oh yes, good old Kirtland Air Force Base. Never been there myself. I've heard some fun stories. Nothing like this. The surveyors being told to survey, because it sprawls quite a bit. Surveyors being told, watch out for the unexploded ammunition that's been left over from weapons tests and, things like that. And, hey, got some interesting things out there. I'm not entirely sure what they all are, but, that's an interesting little group.
Nice.
And I have access to the orthographic images of it all. That's, the pictures. That's the more simple way of saying it. But all the data together, I'm kind of surprised it's not used a bit more in certain ways than it could be, but, when you deal with politicians, you don't expect anything too bright from them.
Yes, that's why there's certain sort of open community projects. There's what was the project called? Basically, it was like Google Maps, but it was entirely created off of data that people had harvested off of their own GPS devices.
Ooh.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the project offhand, but it's a really neat idea. The only problem I had with it when I went there was they didn't have exactly a whole lot of street name information for San Diego. They had plenty of very exact street locations where people had driven their cars. I could tell because there's a section pretty close to where I live, just a little bit south, where a canyon pretty much cuts right through it. And so you've got a lot of streets that end at a certain spot and then begin on the other side of the canyon. And since there's houses lining the canyon, you would never be able to tell just going down one street. Like there's no terminus that says no bridge here, please go around. It just ends in a house.
Yeah, using the GPS navigation system in your car. Drive forward 500 meters, then turn left. Turn left off a cliff.
Oh yeah, it's like that shouldn't be too difficult to figure out. Either the city of San Diego or whatever county you're in should have that information available online.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sure they do. It's just, and that's one of those community projects that's very clearly in the infancy stages. I imagine we're going to start hearing more of it as people start getting upset at the intentional errors in Google Maps and Google Earth and start saying, I need something better that's more accurate and that doesn't have an agenda behind it. And people are going to start saying, ooh, what's this? So, yeah.
Yeah, no agenda behind it. I'm sort of thinking of a weird guy that's, can't think of his name, but he reckons he's the guy that came up with Linux all those years ago, and he bitches about how the world doesn't have Linux systems and everyone's an idiot for not having it. He kind of looks like Gimli from Lord of the Rings, only taller, but with just as much hair. I can't think of his name.
But you gotta join the revolution, man. Fight the power, man.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't have it either, so what does that say?
Yeah, my wife was just telling me that there's a street completely missing off of Google Maps in our area.
That is a surprise.
Well, truth be told, this is just like that made me remember. This is like that found from Gregory's Maps in Australia. Is that in every edition of that street guide, they always have maps. They always have streets which do not exist on the maps. Apparently, this is because they don't want, or if they do that, so that people don't copy them. Because if they do,
right,
that's easy to work out where they came from.
Yeah, I mean that all map makers do that, and it's really, really, really frustrating. I
don't think we do. Our non-existent roads are there because it was platted on a property plat at some point in the past, and whether or not a dirt road was ever plowed there or not, it's still there. We're gradually getting rid of those over time as development creeps out, but that kind of explains us. Although, if we have non-existent stuff, I don't think we have any in our data, not intentionally. It is quite possible, though. Communication's not always the greatest between entities, departments, and all that. So sometimes the errors in data are simply because nobody talks to each other.
Right.
The expanding bureaucracy is expanding to expand the expanding bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah.
in cooperation with the Department of Redundancy, with the cooperation of the Department of Redundancy.
You two don't know the true horror of it. I work in bureaucracy. I know.
I work for Apple. We do our bureaucracy in a think different kind of way. It's still a bureaucracy.
It's inefficient because it's different.
So,
although apparently the big one's meant to be the Australian ones, the inefficiencies, particularly Centrelink and particularly Telstra, but we don't want to go into them unless you want to hear a big little fight about rant about them.
Dude, we hear the rants without electronic assistance. It's that bad. Okay, so let's move on to the general topic of discussion.
General topic.
Yes, the general topic, which is kind of specific to one particular host tonight, and that is parenting.
Yeah, that's you.
How'd you know?
Maybe it's that kidnapping you've been into.
I'm gonna just.
Honey, got an extra kid for you tonight.
Actually, usually it was, dear, put the baby down. It's not ours. But when we did get around to deciding that okay, now is the time, I got to tell you, for us it was kind of a natural development of our relationship, because we had been married 9 years by that point, and it was like one of those things that it's just kind of about time.
What, you mean you got married and then had a kid? You know that's unnatural, Homer.
What can I say? We just do things differently around here.
I guess so.
But
Out in California way, that's how they do it.
No. The California norm is to marriage. What's that? Oh, that's
Unless it's gay marriage.
Unless it's gay marriage, yes, exactly.
The only ones to get married in California, it appears.
Certainly, it seems like it, yes.
And if anyone wants to make any comments about that, the only thing I would like to say is Neil Patrick Harris, and that's all you shall find out.
Moving on.
Not that.
A few points of advice that I would like to give you that I don't know if anybody's heard these before, but if they were given to me, they went in one ear and out the other. So just to emphasize, number one, you're not ready. You're never going to be ready. It's not a question of, oh, well, maybe this person needs just a little more time to get the finance. No, you're not ready. Nobody is ever ready. It's just one of those things that when it happens, you have to take it as it happens.
Of course, that's numbers 1 through to 5, isn't it?
Pretty much.
It's also, that actually is kind of like that quote, which is, I think it's J.P. Morgan was meant to have made, which is about the cost. If you have to question the cost, you can't afford it. Pointer number 2. When you are having the kid, when the pregnancy is going on, life is kind of going to go as normal, except you're going to have to make some concessions for the fact that the belly is getting rounder and she's not able to move as much or as quickly or anything like that. And you're going to space that you're going to love, which is called the couch.
What?
You're going to find a new space you like called the couch to sleep on.
Actually, there wasn't much of that. Although some nights it was so warm that the coolest place in the house was on the couch, so Jolene would tend to fall asleep there. Because, as you may or may not know, pregnant women, their body temperature just shoots right on up. And Jolene had this wonderful, wonderful experience of every smell for like 2 miles was just as powerful as if it was like right under her nose.
Well,
Yeah, every smell.
Well, the point I made with that is something that someone I know had an issue, which was that the girl that they knew that was having their kid had interesting mood swings, particularly ending up with them sleeping on the couch most of the time.
Not surprised. Yeah, hormones are a big deal. But that's one of those things that if you don't expect it, you need to be slapped a few times.
Reality? What's that?
Exactly. Oh yes. So back to my second point. When that baby arrives, you might as well just say, okay, for 6 months, I'm doing nothing but going to work and going home. Period. You are not going to have the energy. You're not going to have the brain power. Your mind is going to be spending its time wrapping itself around the idea that there's this other person, and she's totally committed to being in a relationship with me, and she also is completely dependent on me. Oh my.
I should point out that's actually as home as there, because it could be in general just them. You're saying her. That's why I'm making the point.
Well, yeah, and I'm
Talking about frailer. So instead of someone's figure,
it's a narrative tool. I am personalizing it.
Yes, but not everyone might have a girl as their child.
Well, according to English professors, the term for child of parents back way when English was still being formed from its root German and French, girl actually referred to a child of either gender. So there.
English. Such a fun language.
Quite. So, it took me a good solid 6 months to get to the point.
You're making me think of something about the name women and men, but I can't think of what it was. It'll probably come back to me 2 days' time anyway. Who cares? Move on.
It took me a good 6 months just to get to the point where I could say, oh yeah, I have my own hobbies. What are they? I forget. And basically it was just...
Is this my house?
Yeah, pretty much.
Who are these strange people in my place?
Oh yeah, I'm married to that one. It was just basically all the free time I had was, those few moments I could squeeze between eating lunch and doing work at work. Any time I spent at home I was either taking care of the baby, or I was taking care of my wife, or I was taking care of myself to take care of the baby or my wife. And one thing that I absolutely must say, this is point number 3. When you're married, when you first get married, your mother-in-law is not somebody who you're necessarily going to really appreciate, beyond the fact that this is the person that got the person you're getting married to into your life. When the kid comes along, when the baby is brand new and you have no idea what you're doing and you're just so wasted because, oh wow, I'm a parent, that mother-in-law is suddenly going to become your best friend and the savior of your life.
Particularly when you need to have someone look after the kids while the parents run off to do something for themselves.
Even if that running off to doing something for themselves is just catching some Z's. I mean, seriously, it was half the time my mother-in-law was in town. It was just to...
What the hell was that sound meant to be? Was that meant to be a snore or what?
What sound?
Yeah, what sound?
I heard this sound.
Must have been that Trans-Pacific connection there.
Yep. But yeah, what
It sounded like it came from WS though, but yeah.
To my knowledge. But yeah, but basically, what the mother-in-law is like, that's because it's the grandchild. Everything is forgiven for a grandchild.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not for the grandchild. No problems at all.
Oh yeah, you should see my mother-in-law. She is just like this is the grandchild, because of course all her other kids had their own kids much earlier, except for my wife's sister, and that's a whole nother story. But this is like she gets her own photo album. None of the other grandkids got their own photo album, just ours. And we're getting more special trips planned just around seeing Freya, the little baby. So, yeah, I think WMS is exactly right there.
Of course, the flip side could be is that the grandparent's view, or the view of the grandparent could be, why did you have the child with that person?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be the case, but it doesn't really come into play until much later in life, when the grandparent can start blaming things on the other spouse.
Oh yeah. Their child's perfect.
Yes, exactly. Let's see, what else comes to mind? Oh yes, make sure that you've gotten some vacation time racked up at work, because you're going to want to take it. Myself and a friend of mine, we had our kids in a relatively close time frame, They had theirs, 5 months after ours, and my experience, because I had just started my new position at Apple, and that meant I didn't have enough vacation time racked up because I went from part-time to full-time, meant that basically I got 2 sick days that I got to spend at the hospital with my wife, and if I wanted to keep earning money, I had to keep showing up work. Yeah.
Damn you.
I can see that sucking.
Yeah. Especially, just as wiped out as I was, and as much as Jolene needed help, that was another time when my mother-in-law just really saved our bacon, because during that initial period where things were just going to be chaotic as all hell, when I was at work, my mother-in-law picked up the slack, and it really helped out. But my friend, who was also the one that got me the job at Apple, he has been working at Apple for like 5-6 years, something like that. So he has lots of vacation time racked up. So he got to spend like a good 3 weeks to a month when his baby was born, just being at home with his wife and son. And when he came back to work, he had none of the problems that I had. I got sent home once or twice because a manager saw that I was literally falling asleep 3 or 4 times in a minute. I'd be like, what? Oh my god! Getting to work.
That would be fun if you're trying to do a sales pitch to someone.
Fortunately, by that time, I was just mostly working in the back, so it was. I was not.
Oh, they weren't these extra router systems for the computer system. It's not like they're important for anything. 3 months later, the economy collapses.
I'm sure it had nothing to do with that. So those are my major pointers, but I wanted to get those thrown out there, and just this is my experience, and any questions you guys have, please by all means ask, because I know I'm forgetting some things.
More joke questions than anything.
Okay. Let fly.
I think it's probably safer not to.
Okay.
That should be a hint what joke questions I'm referring to.
I gotcha. WMS, anything from you?
I don't know, it seems like you had planned far enough ahead so that it wasn't didn't really have any type of big financial problems or anything like that, because of course you have extra expenses and all that.
Oh, yes.
Now you have a baby, and and of course Julie wouldn't be able to work for a while, and all these little things. It looks like you planned well enough to make it be a lot better than it could have been.
Well, that was
because they did it like a soap opera.
Yeah, I don't remember how much I've told people about the preparation and the planning. We did work quite a bit on preparation, not nearly enough, as I would later find out. But the unfortunate thing is that all our preparation was geared toward having the baby at home in a pool using natural methods, having a midwife on hand, and blah 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 blah. Well, with the appearance of some odd shapes on Freya's kidney, that all changed. It was no longer we no longer had the option of doing it at home. We had to schedule a hospital visit. We had like 3 or 4 hospital visits in the course of a week, very very shortly, just to see if they could find out what was going on. And after Freya was born, we got a chance to do another ultrasound, and we found out that she's got an extra kidney.
Oh wow!
Okay, you know what? That makes it interesting if she's actually the old wake up the next after a trip down to Mexico in a vat of ice.
I'm missing a kidney.
That's
Which one?
okay. It's okay. I've got an extra one already, so I'm safe.
Yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of examinations of it, but the doctors think it may be just kind of a vestigial extra kidney that kind of just developed on its own. Probably is not going to be too terribly useful to her system, but
Hey, if anyone needs an extra kidney, you're safe there.
it's true. Yes, dear. My wife pointed out that we're taking the baby in for an ultrasound next month to get more details. So, yes, the ultrasounds continue even after birth.
Well, at least you know what's in the oven, just in case it's needed. It's like on that Simpsons joke where you see Grandpa Simpson just sort of touching home the scut. You're going, yes, good kidneys.
Okay, so yeah, the preparations. Again, I don't think there's ever going to be enough preparations. There's always going to be something you're going to forget, or that you didn't know about, or that people just didn't bother to tell you about because, oh well, everybody knows about it, or they forgot.
It's just common knowledge.
One thing that is not common knowledge that, heck, most pediatricians that we've talked to don't even know about this. There's a little-known sort of home remedy kind of thing that made our lives ever so nice, and that is using cod liver oil with vitamin D. It's the vitamin D that's the key there. There's something about the way the cod liver oil is digested that delivers the vitamin D to the system. But basically, before we started Freya on the cod liver oil, she would go from completely sleeping baby to screaming terror in literally the course of a second. It would be a switch. And then after...
Maybe remember.
Go on.
Yes. Yeah, I should point out is my mother, she has, I'm the fourth child in the family. Not going to go into that too much. And my brother, he has a son, but my mother also has looked after other children, babysitting amongst other things. And yes, she's heard of that trick before, and I just remembered it now because of the fact you brought it up.
Right. Well, see, you don't think about it if you don't have kids. But, it's... after Freya started on the cod liver oil with vitamin D is the key. Again, did I say vitamin D was the key? Just want to make sure. Vitamin D is the key.
No, you were thinking vitamin C.
After that, she totally mellowed out. It was...
baby crack.
Almost. Go on.
There's a little story about, I've heard on my grandmother on my dad's side, back in the old days, how they dealt with babies that were all swollen is they basically had, this was back when it was still legal, basically an opiate gel, which they'd rub on the baby's gums. Baby didn't worry about teething after that. Baby was also happy.
Baby was on the moon.
Yes, you can thank the paper companies for taking that particular home remedy out of our hands.
I'm just trying to find out what era it was that they finally stopped doing that, because anything from 20 years after that, you could kind of assume was a result of that, like famous movies and things like that.
That was actually, I think, the 1910, 1920, somewhere in there. I'd have to look up the particular reference.
If they got rid of it in 1910, then that would mean Disney was actually on it.
That would also explain a few of the fairy tales.
And that might explain people reckon that Ant Person that come from Disney and Bugs Bunny and talking animals like that. So,
Yeah, let's get this a legal way to calm down the kid, the crying, calling of a kid.
Yes. Okay, well, we've talked about parenting probably enough at this point. So we do have a webcomic to review. Unfortunately, Killerfish isn't here because he and I were going to be the ones reviewing it. But I think between the three of us, we've all read enough of it that we can give a good, solid review of it. And that is the Ozzie and Millie comic. Unfortunately, the comic may, at this point, break one of the rules that we've set up for ourselves for doing reviews, and that is it might not be an active comic going forward. Just to explain, Ozzie and Millie, for those who don't know, is about two, I want to say preschool or elementary school aged.
Elementary, primary, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Kids.
It's actually
basically.
primary school in Australia, but yeah.
They are.
Gone.
They are represented in the comic as two foxes. One of them is the traditional red American fox that everybody sees in a lot of the American old American cartoons, and the other is a gray Arctic fox, I think.
Yeah, he's an Arctic fox. He's grey. He was actually meant to be a grey wolf, apparently, but then someone showed her a photo of the Arctic fox, and she went, "That's it." Suddenly changed the entire background.
Yes. There's a couple of amusing details about this comic. You find out over the course of the comic that Ozzie, the Arctic fox, his adoptive dad, a dragon named Llewellyn, and is one of the funniest characters I think I've ever encountered. And he's got these old stories about how this person who was a member of his family, like Ped Jing of from the Ming Dynasty, wanted to come up with a way of keeping pedestrians from being run over by cart drivers in ancient China. So he came up with a way of indicating to drivers that people were going to be crossing the street, and from then forth it became known as the Ped Zing, the way of Ped Zing, and it was indicated by the sign of a walking pedestrian and two lines across the street. And of course, at that point, Millie says, "I always thought the Zing stood for crossing." And of course, Llewellyn says, "Don't be silly. There's no X in crossing."
Of course, it's always fun when he does bring up his old stories, because he is a dragon, therefore dragons live a long while, of people, of events which would be he would have known over his lifetime, which, for example, they were making fun of early in the comics run, which was around 98, 99, about the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the reaction everyone had to that. And he had no reaction to that. Then all of a sudden it brought up some obscure
the Teapot Dome
controversy.
Scandal.
That's it, thank you. And he would spit out his coffee.
So, yeah, the general format of the comic is more gag-a-day. However, some plots have shown up that have branched over the course of several episodes. Most notably, the most recent story arc. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, part of the things which help drive the storyline somewhat is how it's kind of like Marcus, in the sense that the people or the characters kind of represent certain stereotypes.
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
For example, they've got a sheep character. Guess what that represents?
The sheep of society. And I think the funniest moment was when she... I'm not going to spoil it, but it was a major change for the character, and it was just the funniest thing I think I've seen in that comic ever. But yes,
what you're talking about there.
The most recent story arc is all about Ozzie and Millie graduating, close quote, from elementary school. And there is some talk of that this may be the end of Ozzie and Millie as a regular run comic. I, for one, would be very...
At its current state.
In its current state. I, for one, would be rather sad, but, it could be like Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes is, perfectly typified the way it is, and it's still...
Which this comic itself is kind of an example of the type of mindset of Calvin and Hobbes, and it's one of the examples of comics which basically came from Calvin and Hobbes because people were inspired by what it represented.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very Calvin and Hobbes-esque comic. The imagination factors, especially. I mean, Calvin has Hobbes, which is an anthropomorphic tiger, but at the end of the day, it's still a stuffed tiger that happens to, come alive just for Calvin. On the other hand...
And then again, you could go with the interpretation that what happens in Calvin and Hobbes would later turn into Fight Club. Yes, there is actually a thing online. Search online. It's absolutely hilarious. That is, every event in Fight Club is a continuation of what happened in Calvin and Hobbes.
So Edward Norton as Calvin, just all grown up. Okay.
It makes sense. It works. Which, actually, that reminds me of a fan fiction I read once. It was the only Calvin and Hobbes fan fiction I've ever read, and probably should remain that way, just to preserve the pristine, diamond-like nature of this particular fanfic. And basically, it was Calvin grows up, and eventually he stops talking to Hobbes, and Hobbes just becomes another stuffed animal. And Susie from across the street grows up with him, and they get married, and they have a kid. But at some point, Calvin's wife dies, and his daughter has this horse that she's given a name to. And at one point, she says, kiss Fred, or whatever the horse's name, goodnight. And so Calvin has this moment of introspection where he remembers what it was like to talk to Hobbes every night, and so he does the nice thing and gives the horse a kiss, and thinks he hears, as he's leaving the room, the horse talking to his daughter, and then he goes into his own room, and there's Hobbes saying, "Well, that was a nice thing you did there," and it was a very beautiful little reunion piece that. Again, it was so well written, I don't think I ever want to read another Calvin and Hobbes fanfic, just because I'm worried it might spoil the experience. I don't know if it's me saying a comment about the internet, but I'm almost kind of slightly disappointed that you weren't talking about one where it was something to do with sex in it, which is what most of the fanfiction online is about. Yeah,
as disturbing as it can be.
I specifically avoided that kind of thing just because, I didn't want to experience that. Okay, let's.
One little point you said beforehand about with the comic about where it might be breaking the rules to review it because it could be one that's ending. We actually have no rule against reviewing comics which have ended. In fact, there's probably a few that I can think of which would be good to actually review because they're finished. It's just the ones we've reviewed so far are still ongoing at the time we've reviewed them.
Yeah, we can... I don't have any particular issue with reviewing ended comics. However, it kind of destroys the allure of coming into something that is ongoing and developing. For that purpose alone, I'd like us to keep focused on the ongoing comics that are still enjoying their run.
Oh, that is a true point. But then again, there is some comics which it's once you've come to the end of it, I know you can say the point of if you've come to a good comic, you want to keep reading it. Then again, there is some comics finish, it is great to actually have read them all because you can see what, especially if the person that actually wrote them actually did the rare thing of starting from the beginning and going to the end, and it's the vision that they had intended the entire time.
Yeah, I think that might be a good exception to the ongoing rule, because it does mean that there was a definite project there. That, I mean, it's not like it's not like we're going to start reviewing, say, fans, which I'm not even sure you can get on the internet anymore. But I mean, that sort of meandered around the story landscape until it eventually just, I couldn't keep reading because it was just starting to get deadly dull. And next time I thought to check up on it, I couldn't find it online anymore.
I heard it like it used to be, just from what I've heard. I never did follow it myself, but I heard it used to be, subscription only. Then it was on for, and all everything archives and everything was free for a while. Then maybe it's not anymore. I don't know.
Yeah,
I didn't follow it.
So it's just I don't want to wind up doing something like that where we review something that people aren't going to have any closure on, or like in the case of subscription models, aren't going to have access to.
Yeah, well, we're not going to review them unless, particularly if there's comics which are going to be made subscription or they've had some weird things. If you want a good example of one on that point, which I can think right offhand, which you're never going to review, would be Accidental Centaurs.
We don't have any questions for this week because, well, the forum threads are kind of archived at this point. But what we do have is we can announce that we have dedicated forums on the Shastrix website. So if you go to the same website that you would subscribe to this podcast at, shastrix.com, and go into the forum section, there are 2 dedicated forums just for the BunnyCast. One of them is for questions and questions only, and the other is for general discussion. You can kind of think of that as a mayhem for the podcast, but it can be literally any topic you want to throw in there. The questions forum, the only rule we have is one question per
Topic title: Bob is good.
What?
Topic title: Bob is good.
You and Bob. The one rule I have about I should say, about the questions forum is one question per thread. Just because when the question is asked, that gives us an opportunity to take a quick look at the active threads and say, okay, what's new that we have not seen since the last time we did a podcast? And then we can go through and individually answer them. And what the goal is for us to be able to answer not just on the podcast itself, but also directly on the forums, which will allow us to say, if somebody throws a question about computers in there, then I can go ahead and answer that without eating up podcast time. Or if we all want to contribute and we just don't have enough time, or like it's a time when there's a period of time when, say, Killerfish is dropped off the face of the earth again, that gives them a chance to go back and address that particular question individually.
It also works if it's for silly ones we just don't feel like answering.
Oh, well, that too.
Which, yeah, as if that happens.
Okay, so just to recap, we've got... there's supposed to be
what comics picked?
Oh, yes.
What's the comic pick?
Comic for next. I did not really...
Is it my turn or your turn?
Well, I think... Let's see. I picked sequential art. Kellerfish picked Ozzy and Millie. So, Squato, since you haven't picked in a while, you can pick one.
I could technically follow on with the thing we've got, the fact we've got Amphros. I've got between 2. One, it's a biggie. The other one's kind of seen as a biggie too. But I'm sort of debating if I'd like to hold it off until I can actually get the artist to appear in the actual show. If you would really want to hold off until I can make sure I can actually get that artist, we can do... Actually, if you want, I can put both names down if you want.
Yeah, give us both names, and then we'll just be prepared for whatever happens.
Yeah, the first one, this is for the next... to be reviewed next time, and the second one will be reviewed once I can actually make sure I've got the artist to appear in the podcast. And that's because I know the person well enough. First one is Two Kinds.
Oh, yeah.
For those that want the address for it, it's http:// twokinds.com, and that's 2 is a number 2, not word 2. It's also a good change from what there was previously is that, unlike before, the entire comics back catalogue is actually on the site nowadays. Before, you actually had to go to the Comic Genesis site.
Oh, good.
So that one's good. The next one is the Foxfire Chronicles, and there's actually 2 websites for this.
Foxfire.
What was that?
Knew it. I was expecting that to be one of yours, Squato.
Actually, this one's one that's been asked to be put on there too, so that's the other reason why I was debating if I should put it up there.
Never did get through the crawl, but it's pretty good.
Here's your excuse to go through it then.
Yes.
It's actually, like I said, there's 2 websites. First one is http://foxfire.comicgenesis.com, and the other address I'm just pulling up, that's actually got the old website design. The other one's got the new website design. Careful with both because there's some differences between the 2, particularly because one of them has more spoilers about the characters, the other one has more spoilers about what's happening currently. And what I should point out is that if you do notice some changes in the storyline, that's very early on. The reason for that is that when it was first being written, there was the guy that's the artist of the comic was working on it, and there was the guy that was writing it. After about a dozen or so pages, the guy that was writing it quit. So the artist is now the creator of the entire comic since then.
I see.
And the other address is http://www. I'm going to love trying to pronounce this one. Arena, or however it was pronounced. A-R-I... Well, actually write this down too, Homer. Try and you spell it. ARIANNIA and then .com.
Ariana. I'm going to guess. Yeah, okay.
That's the other one. That's the other address.
Yes. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up this podcast. It is now officially the 16th everywhere.
Oh, one quick little thing I'd like to throw in there. I found this out is speaking about the family and all that. Apparently, my brother's, the guy making sure brothers-in-law, whatever you want to put it as, the one that's the brother of my brother's wife, put another way. He has a little business on the side that he makes, which is he makes particularly lightsabers, replica lightsabers.
Okay.
Oh, my apprentice might be interested in that. I want to go blind to him on that one.
These are highly detailed ones, and if you want an example of how good quality his is meant to be, Adam from Mythbusters is meant to actually own one.
Definitely mention
So
that old Jedi Knight.
Yes, so that's my connection to Mythbusters, besides the fact it's done by Australians.
Okay, so just to remind people, we are hosted by Shastrix.com. Go there for...
Shastrix controls your life the good way.
Yes, they don't make you do too many bad things. Just a quick recap. I've been busy. Squato's been about. Killerfish has been off the planet, and WMS has been quiet.
I did get a car. That's one thing, though, for myself. That's fun.
Squato, talking to you reminds me of. I don't know if you get Last Comic Standing in Australia.
Last Comic Standing, is that TV show where basically it's like a reality TV show, like Big Brother on that, or not Big Brother, the Idol type programs?
Yes.
Only with comics?
Exactly. And the most recent one, they actually had an international edition, and the Canadian comic pointed out that there can never be a good James Bond villain from Australia. James, can I call you James? We've got... here's my plan. We've taken a shark and we've filled it with beer. That's my plan.
Perfect.
So,
You want to see what they do when they're on beer? Look at the Great Australian Bite.
okay, so visit Laguna Shive, read often, subscribe to the RSS feed if you can, and WMS, anything you want to throw in here at the last second?
No, just glad to be making my cameo appearance.
All right, say goodnight, everybody.
Good night.
Spoon!
Fail.
The BunnyCast is a production of the Order of the Bunny, Crazy World, and Because of Your Grace, used without permission. Laguna Shive and all other properties mentioned belong to their respective owners. The views reflected in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the hosting company or other affiliated parties. The BunnyCast is made on a Mac.
This crazy world is all messed up in my head. I got you, I don't care.